Good evening. My name is Hamid Dabashi, and I have the pleasure and honor of chairing this celebration of my distinguished colleague, Professor Muhsin Al-Musawi's new book, Arabic Disclosures, the Postcolonial Autobiographical Atlas. The program that I have been handed by our distinguished hosts, is as follows, that I have 3 minutes, starting from now, to do my introduction. Then Professor Al-Musawi will introduce the book for 8 minutes. Then Professor Roger Allen, who is joining us via Zoom, will do his presentation for another 8 minutes, followed by Professor Khayyat, also by Zoom, for another 8 minutes. And finally, last but not least, Professor Doby for another 8 minutes to the 3 presentations. Mohsen will then make a response for 5 to 10 minutes, and then we open it up for conversation and such. I'm going to use my, I'll do brief introductions, but first, by way of introducing Mohsen and this, I just want to share the following. We did a presentation of this book about a couple of months ago at the faculty club, at the faculty house, that I was also there. But when Mohsen says jump, I just say hi. I just do as he commands. You know, I'm an Iranian, I'm afraid of Iraqis, so I just do as he said. But then at the time, I had just received a PDF copy, but now I have the actual physical book. You know, I'm a Gutenbergian. And what struck me as I was reading is, in my career at Columbia, as the chair of my department, I've had the privilege of, you know, being the chair when we recruited a number of my distinguished colleagues. One of them was Mohsen. And to be very bold and blunt, Mohsen is the last of a generation. When he's gone, khalas, we don't have that kind of thick command of the material. With all due respect to my young colleagues, they're full of fantastic ideas. Give them 10 pages, they read it, and they come up with the really wonderful ideas. But this kind of a scholarship is no longer happens because it requires a command of material that is from a whole different generation. We were actually reading books. Now, I want to read you just one paragraph. I'm using my privilege. This is from page 8, under geometry and geography. The first few pages of every autobiography proper. For a scholar to use the word every is a very dangerous proposition. We are told not to use these words, but he does, and rightly so. And even a fictionalized one like Latifa al-Zayyat, Al-Bab al-Maftuh, confronts readers with fences, wells, crowded dark places, winding streets, shops and markets, peddlers, minstrels, water carriers, carts, damaged automobiles, and also Quranic tutorials. To write that sentence requires that you have read the material cover to cover. You're not just theorizing. The paragraph goes on, and while I'm at it, the publisher has kindly given the possibility for you to have this book with 50% discount. So talk to our hosts for that. It is, as a result, a privilege for me to be here and a witness to Mohsen's extraordinarily prolific career over the last quarter of a century with us here at Columbia. But also learn from him and see the patience and perseverance and grace with which he has done his scholarship in on our campus. Now, to start, this was simply for me to share my feelings and my thoughts and my sense of privilege. We're now going to give Mohsin 8 minutes to introduce the book. Professor Musawi needs no introduction, but since for the record, he's a professor of classical and modern Arabic literature and comparative and cultural studies at Columbia, A renowned scholar and literary critic, his teaching and research interests span several periods and genres. Professor Musawi is the author of 39 books, including 6 novels and over 60 scholarly articles. Professor Al-Musawi is the recipient of numerous awards and honors, including the highly prestigious 2002 Owais Award in Literary Criticism, the 2018 Kuwait Prize in Arabic Languages and Literature, King Faisal Prize in Arabic Literature in English, January 2022, and Sheikh Zayed Book Award in May 2022. Arab institutions, Arab world cannot praise Muhsin enough, but he, in our own humble way, we're equally honored, Ya Muhsin, to have you with us.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Hamid. And thank you all. And at the same time, I thank the panelists, certainly, Hamid, the chair, being the chair, and Madeleine here to my right, and Yasmin and Roger. I should thank at the same time all the people who are present, and at the same time people who are online. And I know that it is very late in some places, perhaps, and some apologize because they could not attend because of the time difference. Anyway, to go back to what my colleague, the distinguished Hamid Dabashi, has been saying is marvelous, certainly, and I appreciate that very much. And let me go to what we had a discussion just a minute ago before we came to the building. That is, Hamid suggested something. He said, why not shorten the title? That is, instead of having the Postcolonial Autobiographical Atlas, for instance, we can just settle for Arabic Autobiographical Atlas, and that is, which is a shorter title, certainly, but the publisher noticed at that time that there are a few books which carry the kind of autobiography, Arabic autobiography or something, and they don't want any repetition or seemingly, and they would like something like a departure. And that is exactly what I intended to do. So what I did is not a survey of autobiography, because this is very easy, it has been done, and on many occasions it is nonsensical. That is to say, yes, it covers a lot of material, but so in the end, you go to the autobiography and read it. I mean, it doesn't add to our knowledge a lot, and this is why I thought, no, what we need is to interrogate the thing itself and go into the particulars of autobiography itself. And one of my colleagues raised the question, and I think Hamid heard that question, which is very good question, certainly, that most of these people whom I am, that is, dealing with, are coming after the political kind of liberation. Should we say that the post-colonial doesn't apply? And my response at that time is, no, if we look at the title, the post-colonial is not hyphenated. So the idea is not a historical kind of continuity, which I am talking about before and after. I'm talking about, no, a kind of consciousness which has been emerging, and it has been kind of decolonizing the culture itself. So that is the significance of the title. Why the difference between the titles? The problem is more serious when we translate this in Arabic. And for instance, a recent book of mine, the Postcolonial Arabic novel, not a recent, I mean 2003, the Postcolonial Arabic novel, when they translate it in Arabic, the problem, we don't have that kind of a phrase. We don't have the ما بعد الاستعمار, which means very little if you don't hyphenate it, just the opposite of the English, you see, just the opposite. And for that matter, certainly, you need to be very careful about phrasing in order to provide your audience with a necessary understanding of what you are doing. Now, if I go to the topic itself, and as I mentioned to you, the idea behind the book came to me when I felt at a certain moment that there is something missing, even when we study the post-colonial. And as you know, that was for a time, 20 years or more, actually, since Edward Said's time, certainly. That was very important recurrence usual in the academia. So in the academic field, you find all people talking about the post-colonial. But later on, as we understand, there were also problems and interrogations and what is meant by that. And even at Columbia, and my colleagues here know that we have differences about that some people are on the side of the post-colonial, some people are on the side of world literature, and all these phraseologies which carry with them a lot of trouble. And at the same time, you cannot pin them down to an understanding, a specific understanding. And as such, when I gave a course in, I think, 2013, the first one, which I gave on autobiography, I realized that while a group of students, mostly graduates at that time, took the course, when they took the course, they raised some questions about that. I told them what is missing is the geography of the self. That is what is missing. So we have been talking about a mind in progress a lot. That is, Salama Musa began this and so on, and the anti-colonial struggle. But nobody tried to relate this, first of all, to space, and at the same time, to other issues which relate to personality split. That split, which is very important to connect the space itself. So you can talk about Taha Hussein, you can talk about Ahmed Amin, you can talk about the Sha'rawi, you can talk about Nawal Sa'dawi, Fadwa Tuqan, and so on. Very many whom I mentioned and studied here at the same time. And you can tell that what we have here, when we reference these people and talk about their own autobiographies, what we notice there is how they are situated in space itself. That is to say, how they respond, how the formation, even the formation of the mind itself, how is it spatial? I mean, we know that Bachelor wrote about that whenever we try to recollect and do something, there is always a beginning, a start, which is quite true, And now, perhaps Hamid, perhaps Madeline, know that always you refer to your birthplace, because it is the birthplace which is very important in your dreams, in your visions, and so on, and you go back to it. It doesn't matter how important that place it is. No, it is there, whether we like it or not. And even if you go to the sociology circle of literature and try to see exactly if there is any connection between the two, and you read the people whom I like, despite the fact that the young generation will say that, but these are traditionalists, like Bourdieu and so on. They are not, because what they did that kind of anthropological research, actually, which is very important, which they did in Algeria in particular, and the case which I mentioned. And they try to connect the makeup of language itself, and at the same time, not only the language itself, the negotiation between you as a community, as a person, the space itself, and other larger issues. So the larger issues which we are talking about are always connected to something else. And it is that something else that is the actor here, or the autobiographer, for instance, even if he's trying hard to dissociate herself or himself from a space and go into intellectualizing, there is nevertheless behind that, there is that space. And we need to go into that space and try to interrogate the personality, because even in the case which I mentioned, like Salama Musa, a great intellectual, and some of you might know that he was the most influential intellectual ever. That is, every village, everywhere in the Arab world, Salama Musa was read. Small books, I mean, just chapbooks. And that was very popular at that time, liberal, socialist, and he has that mixture. And he was playing on the themes which were very important for the people in the 40s and the 50s. That was Salama Musa. But Salama Musa also, when it comes to respond to the British anti-colonial, definitely, and he is ready to do that. But when it comes to the French, he's quiet. He enjoyed the culture. He forgot about Algeria at that time and the occupation of Algeria, and so on. So you find even these intellectuals, you cannot read them in a straightforward case as if they were black and white. No. And Taha Hussein, for that matter, also you need to interrogate that, not in the case which is known to everybody, that is when he wrote the future of culture in Egypt and so on. No. Or the later change when he tried to Islamize the material again, and in effect, because he noticed that the French intellectuals at that time were interested in Islam, and they began to write about Prophet Muhammad and so on and so on, so might as well. But this is not the case what I'm talking about. I tried to see what is going inside the mind of Taha Hussein, the mind that is going to lead us to the problematic issues which were associated until this very moment with Taha Hussein. And it is not enough also to read him only in view of the Enlightenment discourse, which he was influenced by, certainly, and the conceptualization of the Western rationality and its application in Arabic culture. This is not the only case which we have. No, the personal issues are also very important, and if they connect well, or if you connect them well as a reader, you will find that they tell you a lot about Taha Hussein and Arab culture at that time. The issue of personality certainly is interrogated at the same time in my writing. That is to say, and first of all, certainly I tried to interrogate the issue of the theory of autobiography in the West. I didn't spend a lot of time on that, a few pages on that. But nevertheless, why did I do that? Because supposedly it is an old story, and so who cares? It is important, I thought, because what we have, even in Western writing, it is not one single attitude which we are talking about. There is one, that is quite true, in which they try to say that autobiography is restricted to the white race, and Khosrow, for instance, said that it is a white race. It is a European case. It cannot go outside Europe. And if it happened that some people had it, it is only by contagion. That is, they were infected by contact or whatever, by Western theory. That's all, by Western contact. So Western contact became for him the explosive kind of contact, which was, he thought, is the only understanding of autobiography. Even if we take a postmodernist like the novelist John Barth, for instance, and when we try to see John Barth, how he's writing, and he will say in the novel which he wrote in 1991, that is The Last Voyage of Somebody the Sailor, he will say that I belong, talking about Yasmina, I apologize, it has nothing to do with your name, but he has the character in as Yasmina, not Yasmin, certainly. He had that character in his novel. 1 minute? Yeah, so he had that, and he said, well, I belong to a nation or to a culture which does not have autobiography. Look at that. So what I tried to do into that, to go also into Western theory itself, and to try to say to see exactly what Michel Foucault certainly has been saying, and what Nietzsche has been saying, in order to decentralize the subject and provide another understanding of how to write and so on. So in order not to take all of your time, and I can talk a lot, certainly, but that is so I should put an end to that and leave it to Hamid at your mercy, certainly.
Thank you, Muhsin. Sorry to interrupt. I just want to keep a schedule. As for autobiography being Western or European or white people, I just, top of my head, boom, boom. I thought Avicenna wrote an autobiography. Al-Ghazali wrote an autobiography. Al-Hamadani wrote an autobiography. Go on and on. So, and Ghazali Al-Hamadani in Baghdad, in jail, he wrote, Shakwa al-Gharib. Oh, what a magnificent text. المنغز من الظلام الغزالي, autobiographical, etc. At any rate, moving on, the next on our list is, to me, Roger, to the world, Professor Allen. Roger Allen is an English scholar of Arabic literature. He could have been an Arab scholar of English literature. He was the first student at Oxford University to obtain a PhD degree in modern Arabic literature, which he did under the supervision of Muhammad Mustafa Badawi, legendary Professor Badawi. His doctoral thesis was on Muhammad al-Muwaylihi, narrative hadith, Isa ibn Hisham tale, and was later published as a book titled A Period of Time, 1974-92. At the request of Dr. Gabr Asfour, the distinguished Egyptian literary critic, the Director General of the Supreme Council of Culture in Egypt, he later prepared an edition of the complete works of Muhammad al-Muwaylihi and of his father Ibrahim al-Muwaylihi. Last but not least, I have extremely fond memories of Roger as a graduate student at Penn, always on my way to go to George Mackdisey's office. Roger's office was right there with his colorful, magnificent ties, demanding and exacting attention. Roger, floor is yours.
Thank you. Let me just make sure you can hear me okay.
Yes, we can.
Yes, yes.
You can hear me okay.
Yeah.
Just also to explain, I'm recovering from COVID, so my voice is not what it might be, but it's certainly for me a totally necessary honor and pleasure to be able to participate in the session today. As you're all no doubt already aware, and as partially pointed out, it joins a long list of publications that has substantially broadened the scope of Arabic literature studies in terms of generic variety and analytical depth. With the current study's detailed and rigorous analysis of one particular narrative genre, autobiography, long since placed by a scholar such as Hayden White along a spectrum running from history via biography and autobiography to fiction itself. Muhsin has here provided the scholarly world with yet another valuable study of the Arabic literary tradition, one that now takes indeed notice of the implications of both digital and print media of communication. As is the case with his other contributions, the initial chapter of the work, as he's partially outlined, provides the reader with an expansive analysis of the theoretical and critical principles characterizing much recent research on what has been, as he notes at the outset, a somewhat understudied genre. Includes a section devoted to the reasons for his choice of disclosure for the title of the study. Having noted the unjustifiable Eurocentricity of many of the generic studies that do exist, not to mention the notorious famous quotation of George Gusdorf, which has been alluded to already, that autobiography is somehow a particularly Western genre, in which he proceeds to disprove at great length. He proceeds to cite numerous examples culled from Arabic autobiographies to explore the basic premises that characterize the repertoire, not least an emphasis on placement in space, whence one might suggest the need for the word atlas. Reflecting an increasingly prevalent trend, it also takes account not only of several prominent authors of autobiographies from the pre-modern era, but also the way in which contemporary authors display an awareness of that same pre-modern tradition, both European and Arabic, and frequently find direct inspiration in their citation and emulation of the works of their predecessors. While subsequent chapters following this first one may have a basically chronologically based underpinning, the sequential principle never interferes with the rigorously theoretically based focus of the author's readings of individual works. The logic of selection and order is instead based on the autobiographer's particular status within the development of modern Arabic literature culture and the techniques of autobiography itself. The study examines in considerable detail the works of a number of literary figures who are of major significance in any survey of modern Arab thought, including Georgi Zaidan, Mikhail Ni'ima, the already mentioned Tahir Hussein, Ibrahim al-Masani, and again, the already mentioned and highly important Salema Musa. While such important writers may have already been widely studied within other topical contexts, their autobiographies have not been subjected to the kind of closely argued analysis that Muhsin applies in this study. That said, what I have found particularly attractive and significant is that the analytical categories under which the author studies the autobiographical text have allowed him to invoke topic areas and regional focuses that have previously been less studied in the Anglophone scholarly context, especially within the context of the autobiographical genre. Particularly welcome in such contexts are the two women's autobiographies. Those of the well-known Egyptian feminist writer Nawal Sa'adawi and the Palestinian poet Fadwa Tuqam. The most prominent of the male Palestinian poets, Mahmoud Darwish, is also present, translated into English as Memory for Forgetfulness. Fictional writings are also well represented, including the Palestinian Jabra Ibrahim Jabra, not his original name, incidentally, a poet, of course, as well as critic, artist, and musician, the Syrian Hanamine, and the Egyptians, Abdul Hakim Qasim, with his wonderful portrayal of a Sufi circle, and Khairi Shalabi. The enormous variety of social and cultural context and of narrative logic and technique represented by this impressive list of modern autobiographies is brought together in this study through a rigorous and impressive application of literary theory and comparative analysis that makes use of an equally impressive listing of both Western and Arabic sources. No other study of this kind exists, whether in Arabic or any other language, one that treats the genre of autobiography in modern Arabic with such comprehensive thoroughness and insight. In closing, I'd like to go back to the initial comments of Hamid about Muhsin's career. We first met in Iraq in 1988, where he organized the poetry festival known as Marbid, a very traditional poetry festival in Baghdad and later in Basra. And my wife and I both enjoyed several months along with Muhsin and his wife in Tunis later on while he was teaching at the Manouba campus of the University of Tunis. As I reflect on my own career now, which is half a century long, and as Hamid noted, goes back to the pre-origins, I might say, of the Anglophone study of modern Arabic literature, when my Oxford student colleagues would habitually ask me why I was bothering with this stuff, when there was far too much interesting pre-modern stuff, and this was just really something of a waste of time. But what becomes clear to me as I reflect on the fact that even in 1992, I was asked to write an essay for the Cambridge History of Arabic Literature. The title of it is quite telling. The Arabic novel outside Egypt. Just think about that for a minute. What it leads me to note is that the course of my career has seen a vast expansion in the study of Arabic literature in general, modern Arabic literature in particular, its genre, and above all, its methodology of study. So that today, any attempt, such as I tried in 1978 to write a book about the Arabic novel, is basically an impossibility without also taking into consideration what particular approach to that particular genre, what particular topics, what particular literary theoretical notions you would wish to apply to it. And it is in, in that particular context that those aspects of literary studies that are now such a prominent feature of this work by Muhsin as his others. And I go on here to finish by saying that as part of this process where I've been involved in the study of the way in which the history of this tradition has been recorded, that Muhsin's previous work, The Medieval Islamic Republic of Letters, is a major gesture in the process of calling radically into question the historical divisions of Arabic literature between the modern and the pre-modern. Thank you.
Thank you, Roger, especially joining us with your COVID. Hope you recover fast.
Thank you.
It's always a delight to see you. Let me just take 1 minute to talk about the history of Arabic literature, study and teaching of Arabic literature at Columbia. When I joined Columbia back in Pierre Kakia was still teaching at Columbia, a distinguished professor of Arabic literature. When he retired, Magda al-Nuwayhi joined us, one of the brightest minds on Arabic literature, whom we very unfortunately lost to cancer. Magda died very young. Then for a brief time, Kamal Abu Deeb was teaching in my department, a scholar of structuralism and a wonderful commentator on Al-Jurjani. Laura Harb has just wrote at Princeton a brilliant book on Al-Jurjani. Then what I have told some of my students is when Kamal Abu Deeb was with us, we actually invited Tayyib Saleh, the legendary Tayyib Saleh, and his wife came here to Columbia and gave a talk to us. Were you with us, Madeline, at the time? It is on that trail that then Muhsin, we recruited Muhsin to join us. So the point being, as Roger was saying, the study of Arabic literature, and I've been privileged to be under the shadow of all of these luminaries at Columbia, has a long and illustrious history. Moving on, the next on the list is actually a fruit and a product of all of this, which is Professor Yasmin Khayyat, who is currently an assistant professor of Arabic and comparative literature at Rutgers University. Her forthcoming book, titled War Remains, Ruination and Resistance in Lebanon, Syracuse University Press, examines the figuration of the ruin as a site of resistance and potentiality in modern Lebanese novels, poetry, and sites of memory. While a doctoral student at Columbia University, she was part of the Engendering Archives Working Group, Center for the Critical Analysis of Social Difference. Yasmin, always delightful to welcome you back to your alma mater.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And it's an honor to join you. And I'm very sorry that I'm not there in person. It's always great to hear about the backstories to how you and Professor Roger Allen have met Professor Al-Musawi. In my case, I met him in 2006. I was his student, and I don't use that in the past tense. I think that anyone who meets Muhsin is his forever student, and I credit everything I know about Arabic literature to him. So with no further ado, I'll jump right in so I can meet my 8-minute talk. So I said this when we met in person, that we would take walks sometimes along Riverside Park and Riverside Drive, and Muhsin would tell me, I have an idea for a book. And lo and behold, 6 months later or less, sometimes or more, his book would come out. And just last week, I asked him, what's up? And he says, well, I'm thinking about a new book. So I think that we're going to be gathering here in probably less than a year's time to celebrate a new book. Okay, so Arabic Disclosures not only presents readers with a post-colonial autobiographical atlas, it decolonizes autobiography as a genre. It shows how Arabic autobiographies offer us much more than mere life stories by infusing the study with educational journeys, family, and also social and political archives. It shows how the narratives of intellectuals like Gigi Zaidan, Mikhail Nuaima, and Hanna Mina are not mere life inventories, but articulate geography at a time of colonial and post-colonial engagement. In other words, how their intimate genealogies track with imperial and geopolitical events. The book brilliantly situates itself among multiple theoretical strands and debates by interlacing autobiography with debates in modernity, the novel, and spatial theory. It also positions itself within contemporary autobiographical theory while developing a unique perspective that pays special attention to the ways in which Arabic post-colonial autobiographical writings inflect the forms of autobiography that circulate in the worlds of literature, or what Al-Musawi calls, quote, a global south of multiple belongings, unquote. Arabic Disclosures offers an eclectic reading of major pioneers in the development of modern Arabic thought and literary expression, including Taha Hussein, Ahmed Amin, Salama Musa, Sayyid Qutb, and untranslated works by the novelist Alia Mamdouh, as well as the autobiographies of Nawal Saadawi and Fadwa Tuqan, to name a few. In each case, it assesses how each text's being in the world provides a counter-reading focalized around questions of identity. In so doing, the book outlines the Middle Eastern novel's imbrication in the wider processes of postcolonialism, but also how it produces a revolution of form that troubles the Eurocentricity of individualism, or, quote, the alleged birth of individual consciousness as a Western-specific, unquote. The book navigates away from Eurocentric notions of autobiography to consider the intricate life worlds, geographic densities, and spatial markers that comprise what Al-Musawi terms a post-colonial autobiographical atlas. Chapter 1, Theorizing Autobiography, offers a corrective reading of autobiography that challenges racist Eurocentric conceptions of post-Renaissance modernity. This static conception of autobiography, our author argues, is tone-deaf to divergent cultural literary inflections. Rather, in his book, autobiography is reinterpreted as an expression of the multiple modalities of political, social, and cultural traces. It posits that selfhood in modern Arabic autobiography is burnished in the flames of post-colonial encounter. In the words of our author, quote, a selfhood takes form as a conglomeration of parts, pieces, and shreds, an inventory of multiple elements that the autobiographer presides over or feigns to confess, unquote. In other words, autobiographical consciousness is the aggregate of experience, an assemblage of arrivals, departures, farewells, homesickness, belonging, and travel. This making and unmaking of the self is brought to bear on an anti-racist theory of autobiography that the book powerfully presents. I especially appreciate the book's argument that autobiography is not always laden with memory, but rather grapples with its presence. This is especially true for those who experience war. The intellectual challenge is to conceptually reconcile war with a new grammatology. Chapter 8 engages Mahmoud Darwish's Memory for Forgetfulness, written on the eve of Israel's siege of Beirut by land and sea, as the mastery of all autobiographies, but one which begs for a new grammatology in its search for, quote, explanations, its questioning note, and uncompromising angst, unquote. Arabic disclosure shows how autobiographies across the Arab world unite in their almost visceral-like rejection of neoliberalism, absent states, invasions, and the rising tide of a corrupt apparatus. If there is a turn to autobiography worth reckoning with, argues Al-Musawi, it should be sought in the unfolding powerful hold of space as specific moments in the history of individuals, communities, nations, and regions, for as he argues, quote, wars have engendered an acute awareness of space to a greater degree than stability and peace, unquote. Attending to space, tracing its sedimentation in the viscera of its narrators, as this book does, brings into view the economies of violence that are nested within and constitutive of political environments, social worlds, and the individual consciousness they engender. It shines literary light on the prosaic dimensions of life and ongoing war by attending to the overlooked gray zone where everyday life and its pursuits unfold unseen and in some ways unexpected, and in some unexpected ways. Indeed, as our author shows, postcolonial struggles shape the very temporality of existing in such fraught places. Thinking in these spatialized relational terms opens up confining categories of autobiography and helps us better understand the textures and temporalities, struggles and horizons of the everyday, the fight for a better world suspended in the meanwhile in states of siege. Wars and forbidding state borders divide the world and cut deeply across and into our psyche. Arabic disclosure shows how Arabic poetry continuously exceeds and defies these borders, how by muddling, transcending, and mixing authoritative orders, categories, and understandings, by rupturing silences at the level of the intimate and bringing previous geographies and life worlds to light. I was captivated by the book's lyrical examination of the exilic poet's deterritorialization of space as one that is, quote, suspended between solidness and absence. Al-Musawi shows how Darwish reconstructs Palestine in sensorial detail, much the same way the poets of South Lebanon did to account for the tragic loss of their homeland, their Bachelardian spaces of refuge, forcibly removed by brutal occupation. Indeed, all the autobiographies under examination in this book are indelibly marked by struggle, whether it's Salama Musa's self-narrative about shaking off the colonialist yoke and the traces left in the wake of Darwish's exilic poetry. Their autobiographies allow us to view colonialism through the lens of the domestic. That is, the book pays attention to the oft overlooked imaginaries of the narrator's domestic spaces that strongly reject or inflect the powers that be through dispositions, orientations, mannerisms, and habits. The disclosures in each memoir intimate that imperialism and colonialism animate ordinary lives. As this is a book about autobiography, we need to heed the author's own disclosures to get a sense of its essence. Al-Musawi writes, quote, there is always an underlying consciousness that has at its core an issue of identity. This overlooked atlas sets the argument for this book in motion, unquote. By examining the complexity and the contradictions of colonial histories in the domain of what Al-Musawi writes, autobiographical narratives grow and expand at every moment of new revelations or social and familial interconnections, unquote. The intersections of imperialism and capitalism in the lives of the narrators reverberate in multiple ways that are often difficult to name. Languages, whether they're through language or they're the opposite, they're silences. We rarely examine these relations, which continuously generate subjects, spatiotemporal horizons, landscapes, and life worlds. Although often ignored even in anti-imperial and decolonial scholarship, gender dynamics inflect these subjects, just as they are central to imperialism and colonialism. Arabic disclosures interrogate silences by beginning with a register of the intimate subject of history in a region weighted by colonialism and imperialism and racked with conflagrations that continue to produce destruction and dislocation. By sifting through words, memories, and images, Al-Musawi locates fragments and silences spanning geographies and generations, as well as moments of recognition and discomfort. Works like Arabic Disclosures allows for comparatives on a global scale by opening up avenues for rethinking autobiography along the very conditions of its own possibility. Thank you.
Thank you, Yasmin, for teasing out these wonderful themes in Muhsin's book.
You're welcome.
I was just thinking that the three examples I mentioned of sort of classical, pre-modern, don't like that term, Avicenna, Ghazali, and Al-Hamadani, they were all written in Arabic, though the authors were bilingual. We have autobiographical material. They're not autobiography the way Muhsin studies them in this book, but autobiographical that creates wonderful hermeneutic context, how to read them. Ferdowsi, for example, at the beginning of the story of Bijan Manije, he says, one night I couldn't sleep. And he goes on for a whole long time talking about his household and his companion and this and that, which makes it difficult to read whether he's being fictional or he's being autobiographical. And then in Sohrawardi, his allegories, in Persian allegories, not in his philosophical writings, he plays with the autobiographical narrative in an extraordinary way as well. The travelogue of Nasr Khosrow is also kind of autobiographical, talking about first-person narrative when he goes to Egypt. So the domain that Muhsin has introduced to us, it opens up all kinds of windows for the material in the neighborhood. Last but not least, we're going to Professor Doby, who teaches French and comparative literature at Columbia here. She's the author of Foreign Bodies, Gender, Language, and Culture in French Orientalism, 2001, Trading Places, Colonization and Slavery in 18th Century French Culture, 2010, Relire Mayotte Capécia, Une femme de Antilles dans l'espace colonial français, 2012, and articles on the 1001 Night, the field of Mediterranean studies, and the contemporary literature of migration. She's currently writing a book on Algerian culture in the wake of the Black decades of the 1990s. Madeleine?
Thank you, and thank you to the Heyman Center, to Hamid and Muhsin for inviting me to participate. So as everybody knows, when you go last, you end up reiterating all the wise things that have already been said. But maybe that's okay, because no one will leave here tonight without a really firm grasp of what is going on in this wonderful book. So as my colleagues have said, Arabic Disclosures, the Postcolonial Autobiographical Atlas, presents a critique of the abiding Eurocentrism of scholarship on autobiography. As Muhsin Al-Musawi writes, a lack of cultural and post-colonial consciousness and a subservience to lamentable racist readings of cultures has limited the scope and theory of autobiography. He rightly explains that the origins of the genre, or the constellation of genres that we can call autobiographical, are usually held to be European, despite the Numidian, today Algerian roots of St. Augustine, a key reference for much later autobiographical writing. Musawi links the association of autobiography with Europe or the West to the perception that Europe, the West, have been the cradle of self-consciousness and the cradle of subjectivity. By contrast, Arabs, Muslims, have been deemed incapable of introspection and self-reflection. So he devotes a lengthy critique to the work of scholars such as the French specialist of the Maghreb, Jean Desjeux, who extrapolated from the fact that the word Islam means surrender, the idea that in Arab societies, and by extension Arabic letters, the individual is always subordinate to a greater power or entity. He is similarly rather critical of Deborah Kelly's book, Autobiography and Independence, Selfhood and Creativity in North African Postcolonial Writing in French, which he finds too readily embraces the Moroccan sociologist and writer Fatima Mernissi's claim that in Arab societies, the self is invariably subordinate to society. For Musawi, such claims are anchored in an Orientalist binarism in which Western individualism is pitted against the more holistic spirit of Arab Muslim cultures. These claims are also belied by the fact that, as Arabic Disclosures demonstrates, and I think this is, perhaps the book's most fundamental contribution, there is an enormous reservoir of Arabic autobiography written at every historical point, as Hamid was just suggesting, from the classical period to the Nahda to the present. To read this book is, in fact, I think, to discover that almost every Arab writer or intellectual of note produced some form of self-writing, whether in the form of a memoir or through the medium of the autobiographical novel. Musawi provides us with some tools for understanding this propensity for autobiography by interpreting it in light of the broader drive to produce national cultural archives. Drawing on Foucault, Bourdieu, and Marshall McLuhan's thinking on authorship, literary markets, and symbolic capital, Musawi suggests that Arab writers have consistently sought to establish themselves as littérateurs, leading lights of a much wider indigenous or post-colonial literary culture. So as you know already, the book is subtitled The Postcolonial Autobiographical Atlas, reflecting a second major intervention. The argument that in order to think autobiography beyond the European context, or Western context, we need to attend to the entanglement of the writing of the self with the writing of place. In Arabic literature, Musawi asserts, the account of an individual life is almost always interwoven with an account of a city, a neighborhood, a childhood home. Drawing on seminal theorists of space, such as Gaston Bachelard and Henri Lefebvre, he insists on the co-production of self and space. The memoir of Edward Said, aptly titled Out of Place, provides one of many rich examples by its evocative emphasis on the formative impact of the various cities in which Said came of age. I find this emphasis on the spatiality of Arabic autobiographical writing convincing. It also aligns with Musawi's broader thesis, and here he cites the comparative literature scholar Susan Stanford Friedman's idea that in order to expand the scholarly geography of autobiography, we need to question the assumption that autobiography is a coefficient of individualism. I am perhaps a bit less convinced, and this is a question I have for you, Muhsin, by your use of the work of Franco Moretti, notably Moretti's book, Graphs, Maps, and Trees. So Moretti argues that in order to make comparative literature more worldly, to move it away from its Eurocentric roots, we need to aggregate scholarship on literature from many parts of the world. He is known indeed as a theorist of distant reading, in which individual texts disappear in favor of a focus on statistics and units such as genres and themes. So I'm not objecting necessarily to this quantitative approach to literary space, but it does seem to me quite different and perhaps at odds with the thick descriptions that Musawi identifies in so many of the texts that he discusses. I would say, in fact, one of the real qualities of this book is the use of quotations, which, as Hamid was saying, Muhsin is so well placed to do because of his unparalleled knowledge of the broad sweep of Arabic literature. I think that these quotations reflect, above anything else, the really powerful force of nostalgia, an emotion, a disease, a cultural affect in which space and time are always tightly interwoven. The quotations also make us want to read these books. So it's a very powerful text in that regard. So I have a couple more questions. You can answer them, neglect them, think about them later as you wish. So the form of the atlas, my question, I guess, concerns the geographical and historical scope of the project. So I have been using Arabic interchangeably, but perhaps it's important to ask what the object of study is and why. The book touches on autobiographical material over this immense historical period, even though it focuses on a more recent period. So we have the autobiographical writing of Ibn Arabi in the 12th century and the fictional autobiography of Ibn Arabi, Maut Sakhir, written by the Saudi-Canadian writer Muhammad Hassan Alwan in 2017. There are writers from Egypt, Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, Morocco, Tunisia, Algeria, among other countries, alongside diasporic voices. Most of the works treated in the book are written in Arabic, but Al-Musawi also considers some English and French language texts, where he's spoken about the Egyptian feminist Nawal Sadawi's Daughter of Isis, written while she was a visiting professor at Duke University. So I guess the question is, what binds these works together? Or to put this another way, what kind of atlas is being made? Bearing in mind that maps of all kinds don't just represent, they also create cultural geographies. My second question is perhaps somewhat related. The book, as I mentioned, rightly laments the exclusion of Arabic literature from many theories of autobiography and argues from its inclusion. But you also seem to want to assert the specificity of the autobiographical practices of Arabic literature, notably by highlighting their immersion in space. The book, on the one hand, rejects the Orientalist binarism of Western self-consciousness and Arab-Muslim subordination to the community or to the divine, but at times also discovers in Arabic autobiography a strong strain of anti-individualism. You briefly express hesitation towards psychoanalytic approaches to self-writing, suggesting that they don't really work outside their cultures of origin. And you also suggest that despite the use of the word disclosure in the book's title, Arabic autobiographies tend to avoid self-exposure. So disclosure, self-exposure, these are interesting distinctions. So I'm interested, I think, in hearing more about the nuances of the approach to self and society that you're trying to capture with these observations. So these are questions about what is distinctive in Arabic self-writing. And I wonder in this light also about the genres of Arabic autobiography. I was struck on page, I think it's page 23, you provide a list of Arabic and English terms that relate to memory, memoirs, testimonials. So when you give those translations, it suggests a kind of correspondence or equivalence of genres. Are there forms of Arabic autobiography that don't have exact or even close European or American, for example, equivalents? Finally, and I hope I'm staying within my time, I'm wondering about the use of secular, the word secular, at a few points in the book. So in the introduction, it's stated that the writers who are at the center of the book are giving an account of a secular journey, and that their autobiographies rarely culminate in a discovery of religious faith. So the word secular here seems to be used in opposition to the word religious. Since these terms bear obviously such an enormous charge, perhaps you could say more about what you mean. I think that maybe that your use of secular is different to the one associated with Edward Said in comparative literature, meaning a kind of critical distance from an immersive formative culture, a kind of intellectual skepticism, often allied with the cosmopolitanism, I suppose. So those are my questions. I really enjoyed reading this book. I learned an enormous amount, and as I said, I really came away from it with a great thirst to read the works that you took.
Thank you, Madeline. The schedule calls for us at this moment to give the floor for 5 to 10 minutes to Muhsin to respond, speculate, expand upon whatever he wishes. One of the issues, in addition to everything that has been raised, especially Madeline's last point about secularity and secularism and such, because as you well know, we don't have a word, Almaniya, that was coined for nobody knows where does it come from. It's a bizarre word, Almaniya. In Persian, we don't even try to, just we say secular, just because there's a weird kind of word. The other thing that Muhsin, you remember last time we had this conversation and I asked you, maybe you want to reflect on it, is how in Arabic, the word autobiography, when did it come into being? The word autobiography, obviously you're writing in English, you're writing for an English-speaking audience. But if you look at, I looked at the bibliography titles such as the one that Arbery translated as Apologia is actually Shakwa al-Gharib in Lawzat al-Hamadanis. Or Ghazali's is called Al-Munqidh min al-Zalal, has nothing to do with autobiography. So at what point, Muhsin, historically, does the word autobiography kind of befits the material that you're covering? But as Madeline said, pick anyone you like, you the boss, and floor is yours.
Yeah, let me start with the last question because it is a question, certainly very important. When did they write? That is, this is, for instance, my Sira. That is my autobiography. We know that Ibn Sina, for instance, Ibn Sina wrote a kind of sketch of his own life. And he will tell us, will it do? I was born as such and such, my father was such and such, my education, and so on. Short, but very important. Actually, you find very many people who did that. And when you go to Yaqut al-Hamawi dictionary, that is very many volumes, multiple volumes. The beautiful thing about that, which I enjoy a lot, is that when he mentions, for instance, such and such a person, either communicated to me or wrote in his hand the following. Now, this wrote in his hand the following kind of sketch about their own life education is very important because that is exactly the autobiography. Now, did they say Sira? They say, well, I mean, first of all, Arab vocabulary, and I mentioned actually in the book which I am planning right now. And if you, in the 10th century and by the middle of the 9th century, you find very many people try, that is philologists, try to tell you what is the other word for the following term. So instead of they get stuck to one single phrase, they have a number of phrases which are there and they suggest them to their audience. Some of them get very much popular and some are limited. And so I was kind of attracted to that exploration, but later on I thought some other project because I should not detract from the focus of the book itself, which I am interested in. And already it is a bit larger than usual. So that is so it was there actually. And do we have very long full accounts? No, they don't need it at that time. They don't feel they need it, because they spread themselves, that is, across a number of writings, a number of books. Remember that the least known among them has 4 or 5 books, and so on. So you find a lot of material, especially when it comes to responses, and there is a lot about that, one against the other. You find a great deal about themselves, and as much as it is about the other. So this is why I am thinking of Disputations as the title for the next book, which is a classical, certainly. And religion and the religious and the secular is a problem, and I didn't find a good phrase, frankly, as very many of my colleagues are stuck also in that. And we are still trying to find out a way out of that. But what I'm saying is that most of these intellectuals whom we are dealing with including people who are still alive, by the way, like Hamad Sammoud from Tunisia, wrote in Arabic, and Ali Mamdouh, who an Iraqi settling in Paris, wrote in Arabic, and so on. And so you find that all these people, they don't have a problem, an issue which we call religion. It is not a journey from denial to faith. They don't have it. They don't have it. They took it for granted. They are what they are. And that's it. So they didn't go there simply because it seems to me that the issues of the self-consciousness, and that I'll come to your next question, that is that issue and the issue of the burden which they feel they are carrying, and there are very many of these burdens, especially for Haria Mamdouh, real, imaginary, it doesn't matter, but they are there, and so on. That is what they care about. They don't go into the other side. Even we know that there are prominent Marxists, 3 or 4 people whom I know, or at least read about, who switched to Sufism, and the guys who are taking Sufism know that, and they switched to Sufism without telling us the conversion, which we read it in Cardinal Newman, for instance, when he decided to switch from Protestantism to Catholicism. And he explained that in a book. And you find the agony of the self there in that kind of book. These guys, they don't have it. These are, I mean, these kind of intellectuals. Now, I limited certainly the exploration here, if you notice, to books that are translated. I mean, there are a few which I mentioned, Hamad Sammoud from Tunisia, Ali Mamdouh, a few others. I mentioned these people just to give you the feeling that as a reader. But mostly I focused on the availability of the material, because in the end, we would like also to engage with our students, with readers and so on. But it gets translated. I mean, most of my books right now are either translated or underway. So at least I have 7, 3, 4 are out already, and a few are underway, and so on. So they are, and they are being translated. So no problem here. The Madeline also raised very good point. I mean, there is also a strong strain, certainly, of self-consciousness in Arabic writing. That's quite true. No, I'm not denying that. What I am saying is, when I engage with that in Western theory, the main body, at least, of Western theory, is that they try to disconnect this from other people. So they are othering other people in the sense that, well, self-consciousness is limited only to a Western mind. That is, it is connected to a Western rationality, a Western understanding, this, and so on. That kind of analysis, which, and very many, and the problem and the fear which drove me to write, certainly, is that very many young people, and the students in particular, who embark on their research, they take this for granted. So either they go to the technical side of what is autobiography, and they repeat to you what the French writer that wrote about it, and so on, or they accept the kind of theorization which has been advanced, telling you that this is limited to the Western, to the white man, and so on. That kind of phrase. Actually, they use white, by the way. Kostrov used white, and so on. So you find these issues, but on the other point, and a counterpoint, you find Hayden White arguing differently, Michel Foucault arguing differently, so on. So while I am arguing against that case, it doesn't mean that I am neglected. The fact that Hassan is very opinionated, by the way, when it comes to himself, and so on. And it is very difficult to criticize Taha in his own time. Very difficult. And you find his fights with Ibrahim al-Mazini, with Mustafa Sadiq al-Rafi'i, and a few others are quite tough. and so on. So the defense itself, if you try to analyze that and see what is behind that, it tells you that there is a kind of a strong self-consciousness, the ability to defend the self and at the same time to impose its own being on the other. So it doesn't mean it is absent, but it means that it is situated within a moment in Arab history and Arab intellectual life that is important to notice and to understand. It doesn't mean that they are necessarily right, because as I mentioned in the book, that for instance, the discussion between Taha, when he was a student in Paris, and Saad Zaghloul, the leader of the national movement at that time, for instance, the understanding of history. Taha Hussein is very much influenced by what is the understanding or conceptualization of history, not only as sequentiality, but at the same time under the impact of the Western kind of rationality. And what is the answer of the national leader to him? This is not history. He taught him history, that is Saad Zaghloul, the national leader, not the intellectual. He's telling him the colonial power is the one that writes history. Power. Look at that. Look at the different conceptualization of history. Here is the intellectual, the young intellectual, who's going to provide us with a lot to impact people. And here is Saad Zaghloul, the national leader, who never posed himself as other than a national leader, and so on. So we have these issues, certainly, which are quite important. I think I should stop, right?
I want to just open it up for the audience. You have been very gracious and patient. If you have questions, comments that you wish to share, please do so. And there is a microphone to which you can speak. One thing, while you're putting your thoughts together, when Madeline was talking about extended quotations, that inevitably when somebody like Muhsin is writing about a vast body of literature, that he cannot assume his readers know this body of literature, that puts a particular twist to the prose. But at the same time, I think something else is happening, which is English language, or French, or whatever language we're writing in, English language is being appropriated for this kind of prose. This itself, put it provocatively, English becomes an Arabic language. You follow? Because you take the body of work that Muhsin has done, or other scholars have done, and other scholars will do, out of English language. Where are we? What are we left with? So this body of scholarship has a catalytic effect on English language itself, the same way that when Cleto writes in French, Abdel Fattah Cleto, he is appropriate. I had a debate with him, when he was writing his book, لن تتكلم لغتي, etc. I said, listen, French is a Moroccan language. Live with it. What can you do? You cannot colonize a country for a long time and then you say, no, this is I promise I stop. My colleague Mamadou Diouf, Senegalese scholar, was here in La Maison Française. I don't know if you know the stories. And then some French consulate or somebody was here and they spoke, and he told Mamadou, "Ne vous parlez français très bien." And I should have told him, "You don't speak it back yourself." Language crosses borders and is a living organism. Is not something always my language, don't touch it. At any rate, the floor is yours. Questions, comments, thoughts to share, please.
Oh, sorry. This is my first day, and this is an amazing presentation. But it's in the naming. I'm really interested in the name of the book and how it corresponds to an atlas. When I think of an atlas, I think of a map, and I'm trying to understand or recognize at least where the map leads. And so, is it to the atlas of the world, or is it to the Arabic world, or is it to Western Arabic correspondence? what makes it an atlas, I guess is my question.
No, you are right. I mean, there is the Arabic side of the thing, and that will bring me again to what Madeleine said about the interchangeable use of Arabic and Arab. Arab, I use it as an adjective for general. That is Arab people, Arab nation, Arabs. When I say Arabic, I limit the issue to language and specifically literature sometimes, and so on. So that is one side of the thing. The other side, though, is when you say which one, which atlas, which geography, there is these people, some of them, though, they have been moving back and forth between, and I brought the case of Salam Musa, I brought the case of Jabra Ibrahim Jabra, Nawal Saadawi, Ali Mamdouh, this, that, all these people, even Mahmoud Darwish, they move. So they move from, let us say, a specific space that is Bethlehem, in the case of Jabra, for instance, moving to Jerusalem, but also moving to Cambridge University and studying there. And he will tell us about what he saw, what he did, and so on, and so on. But there are also limits. But even within the limits, there are geographies. For instance, Hanamin, the Syrian, is moving between villages because the family was so poor, and they are looking for any place just to survive. So they moved from one place in order to find a job that is for his father and so on. They were kids, and he is talking about that. And for Mahmoud, certainly it is a problem. It is the departure from the village itself, that is, he was dislocated, displaced, threatened, and so on with his family, and he was only a child. It will remain. That kind, it will remain. So what is spatial, and what do we think of what remains in memory itself? Is memory carrying the load of that space? In these cases, yes, it does. This is why Jabra recollects Bethlehem. This is why Mahmoud Darwish recollects Birwa, his village, always, until the last minute, until his death. For instance, when he wrote his poem, it is called in Arabic, Talaliyat al-Birwa. That is the Birwa prelude. That is going to the pre-Islamic nostalgic mode of writing poetry. And so when the poet used to pass by a campsite or ruins and remembering the beloved, the departing camp, the departing group, and so on. So you can find that this is kind of a vast space which we are talking about, and which these minds having to be connected to the birthplace, but at the same time, they have been engaging with multiple places, whether they are physical or certainly imagined and as such sustained in memory.
Any other question, comment, thoughts to share? Please.
Hello. Okay, this is loud. I really enjoyed last semester's class, right? It was centered around the book. And I specifically love the title, specifically disclosures, right? Because it feels like you're revealing the secrets of the text, right? I would always read the book and then I would read the chapter relating to the book, and then I would reread the book and it would feel like I was reading a completely different book, right? And my question is related to something that Professor Dobie touched on, and it's how do we make of the fact that autobiographies are supposed to be revealing of the self, but there's a lot of things being withheld at the same time. Is it maybe the selves of others being imposed on the author as well, or is it like what does that relate to?
The question, no, this is very important, certainly, and Martin right. I mean, what is there and what is not there? First of all, I mean, this is the simple side of it. That is what is being disclosed to you as a reader, that is the audience in general, and what is not. We know that very many, Dostoevsky, certainly for one, and a few others, said that if somebody will tell you that she are going to write their autobiographies completely, that is full, they are lying. They are not telling you the truth. That it is impossible, because this, if you admit to the things which you think of, or your family or your society think of as weaknesses, you won't do it. You won't do it. So even the most liberated, let us say, between inverted commas, individual who will claim, or she will claim, that they are going to speak the truth, and this problem is more serious for women, by the way, than it is for men. I mean, it is, especially in specific societies. And at this very moment, we know it is. Oscar Wilde couldn't explain to us what is what. Forster couldn't do that. This, that, couldn't do that, and so on, until later when they die, then we have something coming out, and so on.
Well, in the case of Avicenna, his student Giorgiani wrote appendix to his autobiography, because in his autobiography, Avicenna said, "Oh, I was always philosophy. I was reading Aristotle's metaphysics. I couldn't understand
Right,
it.
right.
Then I saw Al-Farabi's commentary, and I got it. Oh, no, it's all philosophy." When he dies, his student and follower and disciple, Al-Giorgiani, writes the Takmila, writes the appendix, and talks really some of the issues. For example, that why did he die? He was drinking too much, having sex too much, etc. So that it's I mean, yes, you're right. It's very short, but it's an extraordinary document for the period that it was composed.
But he said, but Avicenna said one sentence, which he said, at night when I stay late,
Yes.
writing and reading, I had a drink.
Exactly.
One of my students in a certain Arab society raised his hand. I said, which kind of a drink?
Yeah.
So,
Thoughts to share, comments. Yasmin or Roger, you guys have anything to wish to add? Okay, please.
Wow. Thank you so much, Professor, once again for sharing your experiences with us. It's been like a pleasure to kind of tie this into what we're learning in class right now. I guess my question is more about, I'm so sorry about the feedback, the like gender perspectives. And so we've already been taking a look at, say, like the decolonization perspective, but specifically with the role of gender and like the role of women in Islamic society or Middle Eastern society. Do you kind of approach that in the book? And if so, how do you give perspective to that, particularly not as somebody who's understood those struggles or faced them yourself?
does that come to my mind right now while you are talking? There is Ahmed Amin, who is a pretty religious kind of person, supposedly, and it is his talk with his English teacher. And when she told him, you have three problems. One of them is this, one of them is that, one of them is that, and so on. And he's ready to admit that. You see, his teacher, an English woman, that is to say, British, and she was leading him to what is the best way for him to change and to get transformed. So he's ready to listen to a teacher who is of a different nationality. He accepted that and he reported that. You know, so you find that kind. You find Nawal Sadawi is a case certainly, which is very important for the question which you raised. And she is quite blunt, but you don't find this total only in the autobiography. You find her this in her prison account, which is short, as you know. Her imprisonment was not that long. I mean, just a few months. But nevertheless, she wrote a book about it. Her account, though, is different from Latifa Zayat, who was also imprisoned for a longer time, certainly, and was known as a political leader, and so on. And she wrote The Open Door, the novel, which was actually her own autobiography. But she wrote it as autofiction. And she tried to bring together, being a socialist herself, she's not ready to go and to deal with gender as a kind of separation between male, female, and that kind of issue, or the in between. Note that this is not the concern of Latifa. Latifa Zayat would like to tell you that there is traditionalism, there is patriarchy, there is in the structure of the family, any family, there is a structure, but at the same time, there is an effort by young women in order to be emancipated on the individual and on the social communal level. And this is why open door. The open door is the freedom, the way to freedom. And this will bring me to Hamad Samou, the Tunisian guy who is still alive, who wrote the title of his autobiography, The Road to Freedom. And in this case, The Road to Freedom can tell you a lot about his own effort in order not only to survive, but how is it possible for him to be a kind of a person he is, a very good intellect. Mostly he has been investing certainly in Arabic language, rhetoric, and literature. That is his field. And he did a beautiful, but what he added also is the life of fishermen. The first time, because his family are fishermen, and that is in Aqlibia, or some of you who know Tunis and Tunisia. This is a beautiful spot, which is very close. You can see parts of Italy from there, certainly, and so on. So he wrote about that. That is unique in autobiographies, and it is very important, certainly. This is why I mention it. So you have all these kind of issues conversing with each other.
Please, sir.
Thank you. Shukran for a wonderful presentation. I look forward to reading your book. I'm wondering if when you analyze the work of these wonderful scholars, did you also go into themes like how do they approach religion, nationalism, modernism, etc.? If you did any subheadings.
Not exactly. I didn't. There are cases might be similar, but I am not exactly familiar with this one. But how is it possible to write an autobiography? That's certainly my concern. An autobiography which can relate to issues without losing itself as an autobiography. It remains an autobiography, not a treatise in, let us say, education or philosophy or something. You can start also with saying something like what Avicenna is doing, telling us that he was educated, his father taught him that he belongs to this and this, his father was an Ismaili, and so on and so on. That is, and he will leave, and he will go a little into the kind of education and the kind of philosophy which he is developing and growing into. That is, so this is why you can tell that he is switching to knowledge and leaving us without telling us a lot about the rest of the autobiography. We have a lot in these kind of disconnections, certainly. And the same thing with other intellectuals who try to write and they start, and later on they find themselves overwhelmed with what they are involved in, mostly intellectual life or research or whatever.
Okay. I think if there is no more thoughts to share, it's my pleasure to bring this gathering to a closure. Thank you, Muhsin, for your extraordinary scholarship. One of the wonderful things that Muhsin has done since he joined us at Columbia to bring our colleagues from French department, English department, Spanish department, co-teaching with them. Thank you, Madeline, for your wonderful collegiality all throughout the years. Thank you, Yasmin, for joining us. We're very, very proud of you. Thank you, Roger, for always being there. Get well soon. Take good care of yourself. And thank you for all of you this cold night to come and join us. As you can tell, in my department, first of all, let me pitch one more time. There is a flyer for the book with 50% discount. I strongly recommend for you to obtain a personal copy. And second, my chair ordinarily, Gil Hochberg, chairs this thing. I'm here really on her behalf, but also my pleasure to be here. As you see in my department, and we have excellent colleagues of mine representing the department, is the hotbed of Arabic literature. My two
from Iran, listening.
Oh, yes. Yeah, Muhsin is very popular around the world, including Iran, where in fact, extraordinary translations of Arabic literature and scholarship is happening in Persian. My department is the hub of Arabic literature. Two of my colleagues I forgot to mention. One is my newest colleague, Sarah bin Tayyir, who also does Arabic literature, and the other colleague, Nohar Radwan, who left for California. She's Egyptian, but she's really a California girl, so she just left for California. It is the hub of the most potent and competent and probing and cutting edge scholarship on Arabic literature and a number of other troublemaking that we do. We have a newsletter that we now publish seasonally. If you are not on our waiting list, shoot an email to Jessica, my colleague, and be on our waiting list. So you know the most exciting things that we ordinarily do. I thank the Heyman Center for all of these programs and also for hosting us. And stay well.